In this nugget, we'll be taking a look at how to create user accounts automatically. And we'll take a look at two tools first, LDIF-DE and CSV-DE. And these are command line tools that have also been available in Windows 2000. Now, LDIF-DE requires quite a lot of input, and it's really not all that automatic, and you'll see that. CSV-DE is not too automatic either, but you can streamline a little bit if you use a spreadsheet to use some autofill functionality. Then we'll take a look at DSAdd, DSQuery, DSMod. Any of these DS commands that we see here are all new within Windows Server 2003. We can use DSAdd to create new user accounts. You can also create groups, computer accounts, and other things with DSAdd. And we'll look at DSQuery to look up certain accounts that we've created, and then DSMod to modify those accounts. And in particular, we'll use those functions to fix problems that are prevalent with DSAdd in the home and profile directories. So we'll fix a problem with that. Then we'll take a look at DSMove to move objects, such as organizational units or accounts if you want, and then DSRM to DSRM removes accounts or organizational units or whatever else you want as an Active Directory object. In our last nugget, we saw how we can create user accounts using the graphical user interface or the GUI, using Active Directory users and computers, and we also looked at how to create multiple accounts using the templates. Well, that's all great for creating, a dozen accounts or something like that. But what if I've got to create a whole bunch of accounts? I mean, dozens or hundreds of accounts. Maybe I'm an administrator for a university, and I got thousands of students coming, and I got to create accounts for all these people. Or we have a company merger where we're hiring a whole bunch of new people into our division. All that kind of stuff where I got to create a whole bunch of accounts. Might not be practical just to use the template. So what I can do instead is a couple of other methods. Number one, I could use something called LDIF-DE. And this is a command line utility that you can use to both export user accounts from out of your domain, and then you can use that export to then import them into a different domain if you want. So for example, if these users were all leaving this company, going to our subsidiary of cbtnuggets.com, then we could export them from Nugget Lab, import them into cbtnuggets.com using LDIF-DE. Now, I'm not going to emphasize LDIF-DE too heavily here because Microsoft doesn't emphasize it as much as they used to, and it is a complicated command line that you have to work with. A much better way to work with would be CSV-DE, which we'll cover with a little bit more emphasis a little bit here later on. First of all, let me show you that I've got some files that I've already put aside here to talk about LDIF-DE. Now, I've created a batch file, and the reason why I've done this, by right-clicking on choosing Edit, to show you is just so you can see the syntax that's involved with LDIF. In this case, I want to export to a file. The default behavior is to export, so I don't have to really do anything except for specify a file name and a location here. And then the server that I'm going to be working with, which is in my local DC Nugget 1, I don't actually have to enter that in. I just did it for measure here. You can enter in a remote server if you want as well. And there's room in the options here to also enter in alternate credentials if you need to. Then I enter in which scope I want it to be. In this case, it's going to be the subtree for my entire domain for any OUs or any sub-OUs that already exist there as well. And in this case, I'm also going to filter against, and I'm going to filter just for persons of the object category persons of the object class users with any given name, and that's what the asterisk is. And then in the export, I want to list a common name, a given name, an object class, and a SAM account name. And then I put a pause at the end here so that if there are any errors when I run this batch file, I will be able to see them, and then I'll just press any key to continue. You'll see that in a moment here. So then I'll go ahead and just double click on this batch file to go ahead and run it. It's gone ahead and exported some files here, or rather some entries, so I'll press Enter to continue. Then we'll go to take a look at my drive C where I exported those files into exportuser.ldf. And I'll double click on that and select a program from a list of programs. I'll just use Notepad, and then we'll always open the selected program to make it easier if I ever need to open it up again. And then we see the information. Now, of course, you don't have to enter in the exact same parameters I did. There's a lot of different ways of using LDIF-DE. That's just one example of how it can be used. Now, I've taken another file here, newuser1.ldf, and I'm going to crack that open in Notepad. I'm going to be able to use this file to import using LDIF, and it's going to go ahead and create a new user account called Sal. It's a distinguished name, and let's just go ahead and look at the distinguished name. A distinguished name is unique in the entire domain. The distinguished name is common name is Sal. That's going to appear in the OU of Phoenix. And in the domain component of Nugget Lab, it's not domain controller, it's domain component. And domain component of com, it's the user object class with the SAM account name of Sal. And you're used to probably seeing the SAM account name as a flat name of the domain and then backslash, and then the name of the user, but this is what that is. And then user account control. I don't have to have this in here. In fact, I could remove this line, but I just want to point this out for a couple of reasons. Number one, a 514 means that it's going to be a disabled account. A 512 would mean that it's enabled. However, this will not work the way this currently appears because my domain policy requires 7 characters or more in the password, alphanumeric, upper lowercase, in other words, like a complex password, and so forth. Well, if I leave it at 512 and I haven't entered in a password, it will not take it. Well, the fact of the matter is there's no way for me to enter in a password with this interface, so I'm just going to have to leave it disabled and then user principal name of sal@nuggetlab.com. And again, if I remove this entire line, it'll still disable it anyway, but let's just leave it in there for good measure. So I'll go ahead and close this, and then what I'm going to be able to do is to go ahead and run the command from a command line here. What it's going to happen is it's going to run ldfde, and it's going to import as opposed to export, because export's the default, so I have to specify a -i, and a file name, which is -f, of this location file, and a -j. I don't know why they use J, but that just specifies the output for any logging that I want to create. I'll put that in the temp directory as well, and press enter, where it says I've modified one entry successfully. It's kind of misleading because it actually creates one instead of modifying one. And then I'll just press F5 to refresh the screen here. Sure enough, there's a disabled Sal account. Now, if I double-click on the Sal account, I see that all of this stuff is empty, and I could enter in this stuff in the LDIF file that I created if I wanted to manually put some of that stuff in, as well as the address and other account information. If I want a profile directory, a home directory, all that stuff can be entered into that. It's just that I used the bare essentials for what you would have to have. But again, like I said, that can all be added. Now, you might also be looking at this and say, okay, now James says I can use this to create hundreds or thousands of user accounts. And then I look at this, and doesn't that look like an awful lot of typing? And we just created only one account. You mean I have to do this for hundreds of accounts at a time? How am I going to do that? Well, you know, you could do copy and paste, but you still have to change things like the name of the user here and the user principal name or any organizational units and all that kind of stuff. So that's still an awful lot of work. You know what? It is a lot of work. And that's one reason why LDIF-DE did not catch on quite as much as I think Microsoft expected that it would. I mean, I'd rather do my corporate income taxes than to have to create a few hundred user accounts using an LDIF file. So let's take a look at another solution as well, and that's something called CSVDE. And I've created a batch file here which is almost identical to an LDIF-DE file, and it's CSVDE. And then you do a file here, CSV user is what I'm going to call this one. You specify subtree, and all this really is the same thing as what we had for LDIF-DE. It's just that it puts it into a CSV or comma separated value file. And then that way it's easy to manipulate within something like Excel or whatever your spreadsheet of choice is. As if there is another spreadsheet out there. Anyway, we'll go ahead and double-click on this batch file, and we see that it has exported 3 entries because it had only 3 entries that actually had a given name in them. And you might be wondering, like the same with the LDIF-DE, why it didn't export things like the administrator account and stuff like that. Well, they don't have given names. I put given names in for the other accounts that I'd created. Everything went okay, so I'll press any key to continue. And then we'll go to that temp directory, and now we see that the CSV user .csv file is here, and I'm going to go ahead and expand things out here. Oops, let me, if I can learn to use Excel here, we'll be all right. There we go. And then we see that it has a heading line here for this distinguished name, object class, common name, and then given name, and then a SAM account name. Now you see, given all of that kind of stuff, now it's more easier to manipulate all of this because compared to something like the file that we had earlier here, I don't have to manually type in this item and this item, you know, the SAM account name, and all of that user principal name and all that kind of stuff every single time for each account. We just create it once for the heading, and then we enter in the distinguishable information underneath it. And then there are tricks that you can use within Excel to automatically make this easier as well, primarily using the autofill feature. Now, I'm going to save the autofill features for the thing we're about to learn next, and that would be DSAdd. And so we'll see those features there. And just keep in mind that this features I'm about to show you for DSAdd, you can also use in this. Now here offline, I've gone ahead and deleted the items that we had in there before. That's still very useful to have one or more of those so you can kind of get an idea of how you enter in the information you do have to have. But I've just entered in a new name now for Kyle in my Phoenix OU NuggetLab.com. It's a user class. The common name is Kyle, the given name is Kyle, the same account name is Kyle, so that's real easy. And then what I'll do is I'll just save this, and when you save it, make sure you do save it back as a CSV file and save it. That's already exists, that's fine. And then make sure in Excel at least that you go ahead and click on yes to keep the existing CSV format. Otherwise, it'll include Excel formatting that you don't really want to have. And you'll have to say no and save it as an Excel file. So go ahead and save it as yes here in Excel. And then you can close that if you're finished with it. And oddly, it still asks you if you want to save it even though I just saved it. So we'll go save it again. Okay, now that that's been done, let's go ahead and take a look at one thing we could do with this. Now we could CSVDE to import this file of c:\temp CSV user.csv. We press enter. We see that one entry modified successfully. Again, that really means added. We go back into our Phoenix OU and refresh the screen, and sure enough, there's Kyle, and it's disabled just the way our Sal account was. Again, because they don't really have a password, and since they can't meet my password requirements, since there was none, it automatically disables these accounts for us, regardless of whether we specify that in the import file. And again, we can go to the account here and see his name of Kyle here. Now, here's kind of an interesting thing, both with CSVDE as well as LDIFDE. If you don't enter in a user principal name or a UPN, which looks like the email address we've looked at before, oddly enough, this user Kyle can still log on as kyle@nuggetlab.com, even though it doesn't appear here. I can still add it in here just for my own reference if I want, and make sure that I put it in, but we don't actually have to have that in there, and he can still log on that way. Well, right about now you're thinking to yourself, okay, so we've got these great command line utilities that don't even fill everything in, and James said there was going to be an easier way to do this anyway using something called DSAdd. Well, when's he going to show us that? How about right now? Let's go to the temp directory here where I've already created a batch file. And the line that it's in this batch file I can also execute from a command prompt. It's just, I like to use Notepad and double click on the batch file. That way I can check my typing a little bit easier and stuff like that. So I'll click on that and choose edit. And look how much simpler and easier and how much less typing there is with DSAdd. No. You see, I've followed the letter of the law here to create a user account called Sally, which is what this batch file can do. And when I show you later on how to use a spreadsheet with this, there's a lot less work involved than it looks like initially. Plus, I've added in some additional parameters here. I entered in a user principal name here, a password of our Nuggets thing here. Must change the password. I entered in home directory, home drive, profile, a member of, and all that kind of stuff. So there's also more stuff in here because I've added in more parameters. Now you might also be looking at this and saying, oh, I see something else James did wrong. That's not supposed to be $username $. That's supposed to be %username %. I remember that from NT4 and Windows 2000. Well, hold on there, smarty pants. You're actually wrong, and I'm right if I do say so myself. Because, you see, in the syntax, and it's in the help file, for DSAdd, it does use $username $, and that's documented that way. Now, then on the other hand, both I'm wrong and you're wrong. Because it doesn't work, and I'll show you that in a little while when we actually create the account. Let me put that on pause for a moment, though, and close this, and then we'll double-click on this batch file. We see that it successfully created the account. We'll press any key to continue, and then we'll go back into Phoenix, refresh the screen, and sure enough, we see Sally there. Notice that it's not disabled because we did enter in a proper password, and if we double-click on this, we see that it's got her display name. Okay, we asked for that. Got it, fine. Didn't ask for anything in address, so there's nothing there. Here's our UPN name. Sally@nuggetlab.com. We said that we have to change the password to the next logon. That looks good. And then when we go to the profile tab here, we see, yeah, we got a profile path and a drive letter that's mapped, and everything is at $username $. That doesn't look right. Isn't that supposed to automatically fill in the Sally name? Because that's what the online help says. Well, guess what, friends and neighbors? No. It's supposed to, but this is a bug, and it does not work. Now, I have to say, I think I'm the one that discovered this bug. I don't know if Microsoft will ever fix it or not. I guess it would help if I'd actually tell them about it. But anyway, there will be another way that we can use to fix this problem with the $username $, and we're going to use another utility called DSMod a little bit later on to fix that problem. But for the time being, let's click on one more thing, and that's the Member Of tab, and we see that indeed we did add her to the Phoenix users group as well. Now notice that offline here I've renamed the Phoenix OU to Tucson, and I've renamed the Phoenix Users Security Group to Tucson Users. The reason why I've done that is because I also want to show you another way of using DSAD, and I'm going to use DSAD to recreate the Phoenix organizational unit as well as the Phoenix Users Security Group, and we can go to this batch file, which will also appear on nuggetlab.com, and I'll right click on it and choose Edit, and we see here that we have a very simple syntax. What I want to add with DSAD, an organizational unit. Here's the syntax for the distinguished name. What I want to add, a group, and here's the distinguished name for that syntax here as well. I put a pause statement in there so we can see if there are any errors when I double click on this. Doesn't look like it, they both succeeded, so I'll go ahead and press any key to continue. Select the domain here in the background. Again, refresh the screen where we'll see Phoenix pop up. Now once we click on that, we see that indeed we have the Phoenix OU as well as the Phoenix Users Security Group. Alright, well now let's get to business and actually start saving some time, okay? What we're going to do here in order to create a bunch of user accounts in here is I'm going to go to a spreadsheet that I created, and I'll have this up on nuggetlab.com for you to download and use on your own. You can see that in the spreadsheet there are comments designated by this red triangle in the cell, and you can look at the comments to get more information about how I created the formulas and stuff, but I'll give you the 30,000 foot view from this point. It's really pretty simple. Here I just enter in the name of the user, and that's it. There's no special formula or anything like that. Here I entered in a DSAdd statement, and what I'm going to use is the concatenate statement, the concatenate function within Excel, along with another feature called autofill to make this all easy. Concatenate just adds combined values from a number of sources. It can just be plain text like you see up here. I just entered in text in quotation marks. You separate the values with a comma, so there's A2, which would be a reference to cell A2, Phoenix User 1, so it automatically plugs in here in the result. And then the remainder of the distinguished name. Then we move on to the user principal name, which is also a concatenate statement, combining text with cell A2, and then the display name is again a concatenate statement, very simple. Password is not a concatenate statement at all, it's just plain text because it doesn't really need to specify an individual user for that. And I'm going to give the password of nuggets for all of these users, and then I'm going to immediately have them all change their password with this cell. Then we have a home directory, a home drive, and a profile. Now all of these, as I mentioned earlier, as I recall, have a problem with the $username function. You can't really use that here. I'm leaving it in here anyway for your reference, or in case Microsoft ever comes up with a bug fix for it. But in the final formula that I'll be using to create a batch file, I will omit columns G, H, and I from the final formula. But if you want them there, they are. And then I create group membership. Now, that's just a few things that I put in here. I can add in a whole bunch of other things. I can add in the department, the company that they work for, a description, an office, a telephone number, all different kinds of things within this if I want. This just gets us a good start. Now, the next thing I can do here is I can add names of real people here, you know, Phil, Sue, Jack, whoever I want within this. But for this purpose, I'm going to have my, my marketing department, telemarketers, that have very high turnover, and so when we get new users, we just tell them, hey, you're going to be Phoenix User 01, Phoenix User 02, and so forth. Might also be useful for other locations such as public libraries, universities, schools, all that kind of thing, where you can just give people generic names. So anyway, what I'll do here is I start with Phoenix User 01, and notice my mouse pointer is turned to a black cross right there on the far right lower corner of that cell. That's the autofill function, so now if I click and drag, it automatically fills in the names of other users down through here. And I can do that all the way down through to create as many as I want. However, I'm kind of lazy, so I don't want to drag any more than I have to. So I'm going to actually select all of these cells at once. And once I've gotten clear to the end by holding down Shift and using the arrow key to get to the end here, now I'm going to click and drag down to use autofill, and it's going to allow me to create as many users as I want. Let's go about 50 here. 50. And when I go back over here to the right, or to the left, I see that they have all automatically been numbered and created. So all this stuff that I would have normally had to type, Excel just created for me without me having to do any extra work. Now the next thing I have to do is I have to put all of this into a batch file somehow. And the way I've done that is I've just given you an instruction to paste the following lines into a batch file. I've created another concatenate statement. In other words, concatenate cell B2, C2, D2, E2, and J2. Okay, so let's go back up and look what those are. Okay, there's B2, C2, D2, E2, and we skipped a couple here. I skipped the must change password, and what's it? J2, that's right. So we skipped a few and we left it at that. Now maybe I actually want to have them change that password, so I'll go back in here and change that formula. I'm going to put back in F2, comma, F2. And then now they're going to have to change the password as well. Now if I go through the rest of these rows here, I can just kind of check this out, make sure it makes sense. My distinguished name is proper. My user principal name is okay. My password is okay. My must change password equals is yes now. Member of. Okay, looks like everything's all right. Now, once again, all I have to do, though, is to drag down through and create a series of autofill functions. And now I've got all the way down through user 50, and we have the same syntax that they need there. So all I have to do is hold shift and drag back up again until I get to the top of these values. And then I'm going to Control C to copy. Control C, okay. And then I'm going to go to my batch file here. I'll right click on it, choose Edit. Then I'm going to paste into it. And it has all these values. I'll put a pause in here as well. Pause. Okay. And then now if I just check the syntax, I'm going to expand this out to just double check one more time. DSAdd user, there's a distinguished name, a user principal name, a display name. You know, must change the password, must change password, member of. Everything looks pretty good here, so we should be able to go. So I'll just go ahead and close this now and save it. And now the next thing I'll do is, let's go back to Active Directory users and computers, confirm that we don't have any users in there right now. Now I'm going to go back over here to the batch file that I just created on the basis of that spreadsheet, double click on it. We see that it's creating all of these user accounts. That's going to take a moment, and when it's finished, we'll have all the accounts in Active Directory users and computers. So let's go now to Active Directory users and computers. We'll click on or press enter to continue. Refresh the screen. There's a bunch of users here now. And then let's take a look at Phoenix User 01. There's their display name that we specified. We go to account. We see that they do have user principal name. We do see that they have to change the password at the next logon. Go to the Profile tab. There's nothing there because we omitted those cells. And the Member Of tab, again, has membership in Phoenix users. And all of these were created very easily with very little involvement at all. And again, you can use my own spreadsheet and substitute your own values for your own organization and go to town with it. Now we still have a problem with the home directory and the profiles directory though. So if I go to the profile tab, remember there's nothing there. With the profile path, I can fix that using a command called dsquery in conjunction with a command called dsmod, and we'll see that a little bit later on. That's real simple. You can type that from one command line. You don't even have to create a batch file or a spreadsheet if you don't want to with that one. However, with the home directory, I could try to do a similar function, but the problem is it doesn't actually work. It'll look like it's correct here because what you'll wind up with is you will have, your drive H, and when you're done with the command, it will put in here DC nugget 1 home, and then in the command from the command line, you'll put in $username $, which when you use it with dsmod, it actually does work, and it will put in phx user 01. So you go then to the user account properties where we are now, and you say, oh great, this is going to work just fine, and you go home for the day. Problem is, when the user actually connects to their own H drive from their workstation, it doesn't dump them into the Phoenix User 01 folder. In fact, that is never actually even created. It only takes them to this location, to the home directory. So now, I have all 50 users going only to the flat home directory there, nobody going to their own subdirectory, and I got 50 users all creating files in that same directory, and what a tangled mess that's going to be. So we'll cancel out of this because that's not going to help us. So what I've done instead is, again, I've gone to our trusty Excel spreadsheet where I've created a tab here called Home Fix, and which you'll also have access to, and this is the basis for the fixing of the home directory. Now essentially all this is it's me manually creating a directory using the DOS make directory command, or the command line MD command to make a directory. And I'm going to use the autofill function to autofill this again, and I'll put it in a batch file. Problem is, again, it's not going to have the correct permissions now, so I have to do a separate batch file and a separate function to change the permissions, and I'll talk about that shortly. For the time being, however, let's just go over here and we'll select both of these cells, and again, I'll use our trusted little autofill thing to, not 300 accounts, to create about 50 accounts here, if I can learn how to use the mouse. And we'll go down to 50, and there we go. So now it's going to create, using the MD command, or make directory command, 50 of these items. So let's go ahead and work with that. I'm at the bottom here, then I'll just go up here, and I'll Control C to copy that, go to a create home batch file that I've created, which is currently got some stuff in it, and I'll paste into that. The make directory, D drive, and then I'll go ahead and close this, save the changes. Now when I double click on it, it's going to create all these home directories. I didn't pause it because I think it's going to work just fine. I don't think we'll have to double check that. Go to the data drive, go to home. Sure enough, there's all my users, and they've all got home directories now. Problem is, if I go to permissions, if I go to the properties and go to security permissions, the administrators have full control as expected, and it's also inheriting permissions from the root of the drive. But user01, Phoenix user 01, Phoenix user whoever, doesn't have any permissions here. So they will not be able to use this folder. In order to resolve that issue, I'm going to have to go back to my little spreadsheet, use the xcackles command, which we've had ever since previous versions of Windows, and then I'm going to go to each individual home directory and change the permissions. And let's just take a quick look at what this does. Again, it uses the concatenate statement to run xcackles against D home and then a cell reference to A2, which in this case is Phoenix user 01, and it'll autofill and change that to each subsequent cell down here. /T means to change the permissions on the directory as well as any subdirectories. Doesn't really matter here because you don't have subdirectories, but it's there for good measure. /E to edit instead of replace. That way I get to retain my existing permissions, for example, for administrators full control, system full control. /G to grant permissions to Phoenix user 01, which again is a cell reference. The F is giving it full control. And /Y to answer yes to any prompts. Otherwise, I'll have to answer yes, 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 yes 50 times. And then a /R. Now, what this is going to do is revoke rights to the user's account, because you might have seen that when I looked at the permissions earlier. All the users have read and execute permissions by inheritance to all the subdirectories there. Well, I don't want all my users browsing each other's home directories and getting confidential information or something like that. My users might do that. I know yours would never do that. So anyway, I'm going to revoke those permissions to the users group. Now all I need to do again is to use my handy little autofill feature to drag down through here. And I'm going down to, again, account 50. I'll Control-C to copy. Go back over here to my little batch file for change home permissions. Right-click on it and choose Edit. Paste all of that information in there. Again, just trust me, this is going to work just fine. I don't need a pause statement in this because I have a great deal of confidence that it's going to be just fine. So we'll double-click on it. I'll let it do its little thing. We'll go back to our home directory here. Now let's go to this folder. Go to its properties. Go to the Security tab, and we see that indeed Phoenix user 01 has full control. We did not remove any of the existing permissions, except for the one that we explicitly told with the /R to remove users, which was read and execute previously. Now they're not even in the ACL anymore, and we're good to go. Now finally, we need to go ahead and complete the user's accounts. They still don't have actually in their account a reference to a home directory, nor do they have a profile directory. Now I've used the Profile Fix tab here just to give you a start if you want to work with that within Excel. If you have custom modifications you want to make to it, it's really not that hard. So I'm just going to go to a command line and show you what you would have to type in. And you can do this all from a command line. You don't have to use Excel for this to make it easy. Here we go to the command line, and I'm just going to run a command called dsquaryuser. Now, dsquary can query for users, groups, computers, all different kinds of Active Directory objects. And it actually retrieves that object in its output. There's another similar command called dsget. That gets the attributes for an object. So this, for example, if I wanted to find out who the managers were for everybody in the Phoenix OU, that's an attribute within each user account. I would use dsget for that. For our purposes, I want to get dsquaryuser, and I don't specify anything like, phx asterisk, which would give me any account that starts with phx. So instead, it's just going to give me all the accounts in the Phoenix OU. And then if I had ended right here at com, it would just output all of the names of the users on the screen, and that would be it. It wouldn't really do anything else. However, what I'm doing is I'm going to use the output of dsquary as the input of dsmod by separating it with the pipe symbol. The pipe symbol is found on most keyboards above the enter key, and it's the shift above the backslash. So if you hold down shift backslash, that's what it gets you. Anyway, dsmod user, and it's going to modify the user accounts to give me a home directory for these users. Now, guess what? Finally, with dsmod, $username $works. Since I've already created the home directories and given them the appropriate permissions, I don't have to worry about permission problems with that. It'll just be fine. I'll give it a home drive for each user of drive H and a profile directory as you see right here. Then I'll press enter. We'll see this thing go to town here. There it goes. And it goes ahead and creates all these accounts. or creates all these changes. Once it's done that, let's go back to Active Directory users and computers. I'll now double click on Phoenix User 01, go to the Profile tab. Sure enough, it's given us a profile path, and it's connected us to drive H and the appropriate home directory. Now here I'm using remote desktop connection to connect to a client computer called Client 01, which is a Windows XP computer. Now, let's play a little game with this. I've got 50 user accounts, Phoenix User 01 through 50. Go ahead and think of one of those accounts. And when you think of it, I'm going to read your mind and enter in that number here. Ready? Okay, you're thinking of Phoenix User 10. Okay, now if I was right, you need to send me $10 for my mind reading services. Okay, then we'll enter in a password here and log this user on, and it's going ahead just fine. Now let's go ahead and click on Start and take a look at my computer. Don't you just hate these little word balloons? Get out of there. And we've got our map network drive, drive H, and indeed it's going to Phoenix User 10. Let's double click on that. We're going to go ahead and create a document in that folder just to prove that we can. We don't do anything fancy, just this for example. And there it is. Okay, then let's go ahead and log the user off. When we log the user off, it's going to save their settings on a profile server, which is the one that we created earlier. We're going to address that profiles again in more detail later on, but for the time being, let's go to the home directory where there's Phoenix User 10. There indeed is their document that I can access as the administrator. Then there's the profiles directory. There's the Phoenix User 10. Double click on that. There are all their saved settings. Now then, there are a couple of other commands you should be aware of, such as dsmove is one of those. And let's say that, for example, with the Phoenix OU, I wanted to move that into the Southwest OU because we're rearranging our structure here. Now, if I wanted to do that from a command line, I would simply go to the command line and type in syntax like this: dsmove O equals Phoenix with a fully distinguished name there, new parent being Southwest. Press enter there. It says it succeeded. I'll select the domain and refresh the screen. When we go to Southwest, now we see that Phoenix indeed did move. Notice that it's also renamed it with a lowercase p because of the way I typed it in here. If I want to rename it, I can do that as well. And I'll use that dsmove command for that as well. It's just OU Phoenix as our distinguished name. And this time I'm going to give it a new name, and I capitalize Phoenix. And it says it succeeded, so I'll press F5 to refresh the screen. Indeed, it does capitalize Phoenix now. So that's just an example of how you can rename. You can rename it to something drastically different if you wanted to. Now let's say also that we want to remove a certain organizational unit or object. Let's say that in the Northeast, the Boston office is just not performing. So we're going to remove the whole Northeast division here. No offense to anyone that lives in Boston, but hey, the Southwest is better, to be quite frank. Okay, so we're going to delete the Northeast here, and we're going to go ahead and delete it by using a dsrm command. So here's the dsrm command for ds remove, directory services remove, and it's going to remove this distinguished name, Northeast. Now, this actually has a problem because remember in Northeast there's another organizational unit called Boston. So if I press enter here, first it prompts me if I want to delete it, I say yes, press enter, and it says that it failed because there's actually a child that also exists, that being the Boston OU. Now I'll enter in the command a little bit differently to include also any subtrees of Northeast. Press enter. This time when I say yes, it goes ahead and deletes that particular location. Remember we did have Northeast along with Boston. Now it's not actually there because I haven't refreshed the screen yet. We still see it, so it gives me an error message when I try to see it. So I'll select the domain and refresh, and indeed Northeast along with the Boston OU does disappear now. In this nugget, we took a look at user automation, in other words, creating accounts automatically using LDIF-DE, which is not all that automatic and requires quite a lot of input, and CSV-DE. Both of these functions are available if you want to export user accounts, so they're very useful for that. CSV-DE is probably better than LDIF-DE in terms of creating accounts because you can use a spreadsheet to help automate your functions. We didn't look at that specifically, but all of the stuff that I did with DSAdd in a spreadsheet you can also do with CSV-DE. Just use the autofill function and all of that. Then we did use DSAdd to create a lot of accounts, 50 of them, and we used DSQuery and DSMod to modify problems with the $username variable that's supposed to be able to allow you to create home and profile directories. Well, we had to fix that, and I showed you how to do that as well. And then we took a look at dsmove to move an organizational unit. You can also use it to move any other Active Directory object, and dsrm to remove an Active Directory object. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.